All right, we're going to cover a couple areas in this video, Section 179 and bonus depreciation. And Section 179, unfortunately, is it's just overly complex, and it doesn't need to be. And then it's compounded a little bit by the fact that in the current environment, 179 is almost not meaningful. But bonus depreciation begins its phase out starting next year, and so 179 will become important again. And of course, it's on the CPA exam because 179 has been around for so long. So, we're going to cover it. Try not to get too hopeless when you kind of march through the rules, and know that it'll be back in full swing once this bonus depreciation phases itself out over the next 3 to 5 years, assuming it does. All right. So, would we rather capitalize the cost of an asset and recover its cost over time, or deduct the cost immediately? And I'm hoping by now you recognize the fact that generally taxpayers would, of course, prefer to deduct the cost immediately. Thankfully, the code currently contains two provisions that allows that exact thing to happen, right? The immediate deduction of things that you would otherwise have to capitalize. The first is called Section 179. The second is called bonus depreciation. So let's start with 179. And we start with 179 because in the pecking order of which one you take first, you take 179 first. Now, again, that's not really going to apply in a 100% bonus depreciation environment, but it will when that scopes down to 80% starting next year. Okay. So 179 basically is a rule that says, hey, you know what? We're going to allow you to immediately expense a certain amount of otherwise depreciable property that you place in service during the year. And we'll let you make that decision every year. And of course, once you've written it off, you don't write it off any further. So 3 important elements to apply Section 179. First, it must be qualifying property. Not all property qualifies for Section 179. 2, the amount must qualify. So it must be an appropriate amount, and I've hinted at thresholds and limitations. Those are coming. And then thirdly, it may not create a loss for the taxpayer. So if the taxpayer has a modest amount of income, Section 179 deduction can only take it to zero. It cannot create a loss for the taxpayer. So we've seen this before with rental properties, recall, right? When you were in the in-between category, you weren't allowed to make a loss with your deductions, and the same thing is true of 179. All right, so what qualifies? Well, it must be purchased tangible property, so it can't be something you've constructed yourself. It must be used in a trade or business. Note that is not for the production of income. And it must be placed in service during the current year. So there is qualified improvement property and certain other real property that actually qualify for 179. Otherwise, we usually think of it applying to only personal property, but that's simply not legit anymore. So what amount qualifies? Well, in 2022, you can deduct up to $1,080,000, and that amount is adjusted for inflation every year, so you absolutely will not be required to memorize it. I will put it in your table pack for you. So in theory, it was intended for small businesses. Now, I'm not sure whether this qualifies as a small business anymore, but what that means is, how do they measure small business? Well, it's similar to that org cost, startup cost kind of construction. It's based on, well, how much qualifying 179 property did you place in service? And if it's above 2.7 million, then you start to phase out the amount that you're eligible for. Okay, so let's do an example. X Corporation places in service 1.24 million of 179 property in 2022. So it's less than 2.7 million. There's no phase out. They could deduct up to 1,080,000 of that property during 2022. Y Corp places in service 2720 of 179 property. Well, that is above the threshold. It's above the amount by 20,000. And so what happens is they are required to reduce the eligible amount of 179 from 1,080,000 to 1,060,000. So they could not deduct more than 1,060,000 under Section 179. Z Corp places in service 3.9 million in 2022. Clearly, this is above the phase-out amount. 3.9 minus 2.7 is 1.2 million. So that means they're not at all eligible for 179. They're just too darn big. They don't qualify as a small business under these rules. And so as a result, no Section 179. It is all phased out. And this really should say 1080. 1080. Okay, but what if they place in service $1 million next year? Well, you would apply the test that applies for 2023. So it's not as if there's any impact from last year to this year. Each year is measured discretely for Section 179, a little bit like we measured the conventions discretely for depreciation. Okay, we're past the first two hurdles, right? The first one was a qualified property. Second one is a qualifying amount. The last one is you can't create a loss. So Betty has 179 eligible expensing amount of $1,080,000, so she can take it all. However, her taxable income before considering 179 is only $230,000. As a result, her Section 179 deduction is limited to $230,000 because any more than that would create a loss. Any amount she's not eligible to take due to the income limitation, she can carry forward and attempt to take next year. All right, let's do some more examples. So example in iteration number 1, Andy Summers, proprietor of a business. He spends $1.5 million for new furniture at 7-year half-year convention. He elects to take as much 179 as he can. It's the only property he's placed in service this year, so it's not only is it the only 179, it's the only property at all. And his income is $10 million. So let's determine Andy's total cost recovery for 2022 with respect to this furniture, knowing he's going to take as much 179 as he can. So we start with 1.5 million of 179 eligible property. Is there a dollar for dollar reduction because he placed in service more than the small business limit? And the answer there is no, right? So 1.5 million is less than 2.7, so no limitation. So that means he's eligible for the full $1,080,000. So, however, the amount he placed in service is 1.5 million. So what's he going to do with the remaining 420,000? Well, the rules say, conveniently, you just use depreciation, regular maker's depreciation. So he would go to the table for the 420,000. He'd say, oh, year 1, 7-year property, half-year convention, 0.1429. He's got depreciation of $60,018. So his total maker's depreciation is $60,018. Can he deduct his $1,080,000 of 179? Well, remember, he can't create a loss. But recall, Andy had $10 million worth of taxable income before any cost recovery. So even after he deducts the depreciation of $60,000, he's still got over $9.9 million. That's way in excess of the $1,000,080. So he can take the full $1,080,000 of 179. So his total cost recovery is the combination of the makers of $60,018 plus the 179 of $1,080,000. Add those two together. According to my math, you get $1,140,018. So his adjusted basis in that property after the first year's cost recovery would be down to $359,982. So you can see that, Section 179 does provide a vastly accelerated depreciation, right? A $1.5 million asset, but after year 1, you're down to just over $350,000 in basis. All right, iteration 2. So same 1.5 million is spent, same way, but in this case, his income before any cost recovery is only $150,000. So we start at the top. He's got 1.5 million and 179. Is that more? Is that more than the small business limit of 2.7? Absolutely not. Does the remaining amount exceed the annual limit? It does. What do we do with the remaining 420? We know that we depreciate it using makers now. We get 60,000. So makers is 60,000. Can deduct the $1,080,000? Well, we need to check the income limitation. Oh, income before any cost recovery was only $150,000. So we know the deduction's almost certainly going to be limited to how much? Well, first we deduct makers, because remember the 179 limit, the income limit is what is taxable income before all deductions except 179. So we deduct the maker's depreciation, we get to 89,982, which that means the most 179 expense he can deduct is 89,982. So his total cost recovery is 150,000, and he can carry forward the balance, the 1,080,000 less the 89,982 to the following year, should he choose to. Now, obviously, Andy could have made a completely different decision here, and I don't want to get too caught up in the weeds. But one of the things he could have done is just elect to only take a smaller amount of 179. And then he wouldn't have had it to carry forward, but he wouldn't have bumped up against the income limitation either. Iteration number 3. Now Andy spends over $2.8 million on this furniture, and his income is only $550,000. So I'm sensing a couple limitations are going to be in play. So let's roll through it. He's got 2.858 of 179. That is now more than the limit of 2.7. So as a result, we need to calculate the excess. The excess is 158,000. He now needs to reduce his annual eligible amount of $1,080,000 by the 158,000 excess. So the most 179 he could take is now 922,000. Does the remaining eligible amount exceed the annual limit? Well, kind of by default, it can't because we just reduced it from the annual limit. However, if we're taking 922 of 179, what do we do with the remaining 1.936 million? Well, we makers depreciate it. So 1.936 times 0.1429, 276,654. So we know his total makers is that amount. Can he deduct the 922? We need to check the income limitation. Recall that his income was only 550,000. So yeah, there's no way he's going to be able to deduct all of it. How much can he deduct? So we need to reduce it by the maker's depreciation first. That leaves us 273,346. That's the limit on his 179 deduction. And so that's all he'll be able to take, and the rest of it will be carried forward. Note that when we calculate his carry forward, it's not $1,080,000 less 273,346. It's the eligible amount of 922 less 273,346. Once he started to phase out of 179, you can't get that back. So a couple final thoughts on 179. It's applied each year to assets placed in service that year only. It's elective, so you can apply to any qualifying property either in whole or in part. You would typically apply to the longest lived assets because that accelerates the deduction the quickest. You do not have to elect the eligible amount. For example, if you were eligible for $1,080,000, you could use $1. You could elect to use $1 of 179. You can elect to use it on any of your assets. So it doesn't have to be a single asset. You could take $1 against each asset you placed in service. If you wanted to. The carryover provision is helpful, but I'm personally of the opinion that it won't last for long, right? Because how long can you continue to purchase a lot of tangible personal property and not generate income? Probably not all that long, but get while the getting's good. Okay, so our second form of accelerated depreciation is bonus depreciation. And this provision has come and gone over the years, but here's where we stand now, right? So we have 100% bonus depreciation for the year 2022, but you can see that it scales back to 80, 60, 40, 20. And let me explain how that works. You get to deduct the applicable percentage in the year you place the asset in service. Anything that qualifies is eligible for bonus. And in fact, you have to elect out of bonus. It is the default position for all taxpayers. So what qualifies? Tangible property with a life less than 20 years, computer software, qualified improvement property, it could be new or used, and it can be used in business or the production of activities. So the rules aren't quite the same for what's eligible as they were for 179. So let's do an example. Gina places in service a $400,000 machine in 2022. Assume 7-year, half year, and no 179. Bonus depreciation is 100%. She can deduct the whole thing. Done. That's it. The remaining basis is 0. There's no income limitation. She can literally just deduct the full value. Okay, let's see. Anything more about bonus? Again, it's going to reduce itself to 80% next year. So, and then the following years, but who knows? Maybe Congress will extend it. All right, that brings us to the end of this video.